Welcome to How to Grow Squash. I'm Amy Aldenderfer, the Hardin County Extension Agent for Horticulture. And it is the year of the squash. So I'm not sure who decided that squash was a good vegetable this year. So when we talk about how to grow squash and all of my how to grows, I have two assumptions in mind. You have a gardening spot and that you have taken a soil test and will adjust the nutrients accordingly. So we won't go through how to take a soil test because I assume that you know how to do that. And if not, I think we're going to have a class on that here eventually. So stay tuned. So when you plant squash or where you plant it, a lot of people have just a regular garden space, and sometimes they recommend planting those in hills. And this is what a hill looks like. It's the circle, the big circle, and you can plant 4 to 6 plants in the circle, and they tend to grow out from the circle, especially if you've got some viney squash. A lot of the squash that we grow now are bush type. So you wouldn't do this with a bush type of squash. You would probably plant two individual plants kind of close together, about 3 to 6 feet apart, depending on how big they get. But this is a traditional, I've gardened in just a plot of land. I've tilled it up. I've fertilized it. It's ready to go. And this is how I'm going to plant seeds. And I'm going to, let's see. Laser pointer. I love the laser pointer. So you're going to put 2 seeds in each of these little circles, because Murphy's Law says if you plant 1 seed and you only need 1 plant, it's not going to grow. So I always like hedge my bets and put 2 seeds in each of these little things. And normally we plant squash directly into the ground. They come up fairly quickly, and they do pretty well. They're a big enough seed that you can handle with your fingers. If you don't like to bend down, I have a friend who's got a very special device. It's about a 1-inch PVC tube that he puts on where he wants to put a seed, drops his seed down there, and puts it right in the hole. And then he uses his foot to kind of cover it over. It's very scientific and very accurate for that. So yeah, you want to kind of, the viney ones put into a circle. If you're just going to use the regular, if you're going to kind of do bush type squash, then definitely just put them about probably 3 inches, or sorry, 2 to 3 feet apart. Here's one that's planted in a traditional row setting. So you can see that they have their irrigation already put in. They were pretty smart to put their irrigation in first. And then they alternately, what I call ping pong them down the row. So they've kind of offset them a little bit so they can get more plants in their row, and they use that row a little bit more efficiently. So they're using wider rows than just 1 plant down the row. This helps the plants kind of cover the row so there's less weeding, and you can have smaller unused land because you only have a row to walk in between every couple of rows. I hope that makes sense for everybody. So here's another way to plant it. If you have a raised bed, squash get pretty big, and I'm talking summer squash and winter squash here. So we're going to tell you what the differences are in a minute. And then they kind of alternated their rows also in this raised bed, and they kind of got smart and put down some black plastic with irrigation underneath, because the black plastic will keep the weeds down, and it will also make the soil a little bit warmer. Squash are warm season crops, and they really need to be planted after the first couple of weeks of May, when that soil has really warmed and done a good job of getting nice and toasty. Otherwise, the seed just sit there until the soil's warm enough for that. So here's a raised bed. These gardeners decided to grow their squash up on a trellis, which is perfectly fine. They will plant them in a single row and then train them once they get big enough onto this. And I believe this is 6-inch wide netting. You want something big enough to be able to stick your hand through, because you'll actually harvest from the other side of the netting. That way you won't have to walk in your raised bed, or squash that soil down for that. So 6-inch wide netting is perfectly fine. Most of the squashes that are vining will have some tendrils that will help hold it. Otherwise, you can just weave it up through the netting as it grows. So you can definitely plant squash in the traditional gardens in the soils, but they do fairly well in containers. We do recommend the bush varieties, and it needs to be at least a 5-gallon bucket, just so that you have enough root zone to support all of that plant material plants, and it doesn't tip over very easily. You can use a soilless mix of compost core, which is the brown husk of a coconut. So we're recycling the coconut husks. Perlite is the little white pearls that you see in potting mix. And you need a balanced fertilizer, because although there's some nutrients in compost, there's not enough. And a balanced fertilizer would have 3 of the same numbers. So you're looking at 10, 10, 10, triple 19, 19, 19, 19, 20, 20, 20, something of that sort. And you have to replenish that on a regular basis, because it's not going that mix is not going to hold on to those nutrients, and it's going to wash through as you water that plant or as it gets rained on. You probably have to water it a little bit, especially during the middle of the summer. So containers are an option if you don't have a garden space and you may have a balcony or just a deck. Or if you just don't want to bend over, you can put in a container. There are some good varieties for containers. Most of these are zucchinis, which are summer squash. Black Magic is a green zucchini. It's about 44 days from planting to harvest. So Gold Rush is a yellow zucchini. They taste the same. They both taste like zucchini. And that's 50 days. And then a yellow scallop, I have a whole list of varieties. And Sunburst is a really good one for containers, because it's small and it'll be okay. It will not be the vine that takes over your deck. So here's some containers. I do need to let you know that squash has both male and female flowers. So what's going to come on first are these male flowers. And the way that I can tell that it's a male flower is because the inside part has the pollen. It also does not have a little tiny fruit. Can you see that one back here? There's a little tiny fruit back here on the back of this zucchini, and that is a female flower. So the male flowers have a little stem that goes right into the back. The female flowers have a little baby fruit that will grow once that flower has been pollinated. Don't despair. The plants will put the male flowers on first for about the first couple of weeks. And then after that, they will put on the female flowers. And why do you say they do that? Because the bees are attracted to the pollen. So the plant has evolved to attract the bees first. So they get used to, because honeybees especially remember where those plants are, because they don't move. And then once they start putting on the female plants or flowers, they will then pollinate the flowers that way, because the bee doesn't automatically know which ones are male and female. And they get tricked pretty much into pollination. So the bees haven't figured that out yet, which is a good thing, because then we need some zucchini. We need some vegetables off of that. So don't be alarmed if after a couple of weeks of flowers, you're like, I have no fruit. There's something wrong with this plant. There's not. Just be patient. Gardening is an exercise in patience. So this is another type of squash. This one might be a butternut squash, a small one that they've put in this really pretty container on their deck. Remember, squashes and most of our vegetables need full sun. So they tend not to flower or fruit as well if they're in the shade. So 6 to 8 hours of full sun would be great for most of our vegetables. And you can see right here, there's another female flower that probably just got pollinated or is about ready to open, because there's that little bulge at the back of the flower. So you can definitely grow them in containers. Just make sure that you water. Sometimes in the summer, you're going to have to water that pot, if it's not quite big enough, twice a day. Water it in the morning, and then make sure that you check it at night and make sure you water it at night if it needs it. Alrighty. So when are we planting these? I've said that they're a warm season crop. So that means that they don't like frost. So you can plant as early as May the 10th. Now, if you're in Kentucky, which I hope most of you are, we say Derby Day, which is the first Saturday in May. But the soil needs to be warm, or they could just kind of sit there. You can plant them as late as August the 1st. So if you find that maybe your crookneck squash is getting too many squash bugs, pull it out, or start another section of garden and plant some more squash at that point. So the last planting date is August the 1st, and you should get a pretty good crop of most of your squashes by then. Now I'm talking summer squash at this point. Winter squashes take a lot longer to grow, so we're going to still plant them as early as the first week of May, but we're not going to be able to do a second crop because they might take 90 days to grow. So, and we'll look at some of those varieties later on. And how are we going to plant? We kind of talked about this earlier. So conventionally, and when I say that conventionally, I mean like in the ground, in the garden, in a row, 2 to 3 seeds per hill, about 2 feet between the hills. And you're going to put 4 feet between those rows. And this is for the non-bush or the vining crops. Usually that's your winter squash. And you're going to plant those seeds about 1 inch deep because they're big. They need to be that deep into the soil. So that's kind of conventionally with our very viney crops. Intensively, you're going to put 1 plant per 9 square feet if you've got a bush. And that's usually I think about zucchini when I think about bushy squash. And if you've got a vine, you can either grow it vertically in our intensive plantings, or you can plant it every 2 square feet. So if you've got a square foot garden, take up 2 squares and plant your vines. 9 square feet is a lot of your garden bed. Or you can sometimes plant them on the edge and let them come over the edge of your square foot garden. It'd be fine. A raised bed. The question I always get is, how much do I need to plant? So your average yield is about 1.5 pounds per linear foot. So if you think about how many plants you have per linear foot, that makes my head hurt. I do not like to do too much math. So if you're going to eat it fresh, and for those people in your household who like to eat fresh squash, 2 to 3 hills per person. So you're thinking 2 to 3 plants. And if you're going to preserve, just double that. And we preserve squash by freezing. We cannot can it. We cannot make it into butters and can it. It all has to be either fresh or eaten fresh. If you do make it into a butter, like a squash butter or kind of like apple butter, you have to leave that in the refrigerator because it's so dense. You cannot preserve it through home canning. I had to look that up because I was like, well, how do we preserve squash? So we want to do that through freezing. And you usually tend to blanch that a little bit before you put it in the freezer. Okay, this is my favorite part because I love to talk about varieties. So I will let you know if they're winter squash or summer squash. Most of these you can find through mail order catalogs, and you can definitely, use the internet to find those. So this is a winter squash called honey bun. It's called a dumpling squash because it's small. It's about a 1 to 2 pound fruit, but it has really excellent flavor. And it is powdery mildew resistant. Yay! Powdery mildew gets a lot on our squashes, and we'll talk about those at the end. So we can all be depressed. But acorn, and it's pretty. That's a pretty acorn squash. Let's see. This is kabocha squash. I don't know if anybody's had that. It's got a smooth, tender flesh that's sweet, and it's bright orange, and it's excellent for pies. And you can make a good baked squash out of that or mash it. It says, now granted, what I'm telling you is from the catalog. So take that with a grain of salt. And this one you can consume right at maturity. A lot of our winter squashes you have to let them age or kind of mature off the vine, but this one can be consumed right off the vine. It says it's vigorous, but a short vine. These are 3 to 5 pound fruits. And this was also an All-American Selections winner. So that one would go well across the nation. And I have some other thoughts about American selections, but I will keep them to myself. They're awesome plants. This is Bonbon. Bonbon's been around for a while. I've actually had this one. It's really good. Again, this is a winter squash. And it has that little button at the base, so it doesn't quite sit flat. It has great flavor. These are 4 to 5 pound fruits. So these are something like you can eat like half of and share with somebody. They really do well roasted in the oven. Here's butternut squash. This one, I love butternut squash for squash pie. I don't know. This one's a 1.5 to 2 pound fruit. So it's not the huge butternut squashes that we've had in the past. It will store up to 3 months after harvest on short vines. So, so you want to give them plenty of space. It is powdery mildew resistant for that. Angel hair pasta. This is a great alternative for pasta, spaghetti pasta. It tastes really good with some red sauce or some white sauce. These are egg shaped and they're about 1.5 to 2 pounds. Perfect for a half a serving, a serving of half of a fruit. You can bake or boil out the flesh and eat it with your favorite sauce. It's pretty good. This is angel hair. Little less thick than some of the other spaghetti squashes that are out there. Now, these are summer squashes, and these are usually eaten fresh. This is Kenfrin or Kefrin. It's easy harvesting because it doesn't have any spines. Usually on zucchini, the stems and the leaves have little prickles on them, and this one doesn't. So it's easy to harvest, and you don't get your hands all scratched as you're reaching into there. It's easy to pull off the fruit. It's resistant to powdery mildew and a lot of the viruses. So it's been bred traditionally to be resistant to those, which is great. I like patty pans because they look kind of weird in a pan when you're cooking them. This is another All-American Selections winner. And these are 2 by 3 inch fruit. And I usually just chop them up and take the seeds out. And it's best eaten fresh. And I usually put some onion and a little butter in there and fry them up a little bit. It's really good. Very quick. You can sow this directly into the soil. And it's a little bit of a different color because normally we look for the white one. And this one's a bush patty pan. So it's not going to be very viney. And they start out kind of green and then they ripen to white. These are bigger. These are 6 to 7 inches across. So you're going to have very productive fruit off of this plant. And the more you pick your summer squashes, the more they're going to bloom, the more fruit you're going to get off of them. So keep the harvesting regular. And I think I've got another zucchini in here we'll talk about. So this is Benning's green. So now we've had yellow, white, and now green patty pans. And this is an heirloom from 1914. And it's a very heavy yielder, and it's really a very tasty. It's very tasty fruit. It's not quite a zucchini. It's almost like a crookneck squash, but it has a little bit of a different flavor to that. But if you wanted a very colorful stir fry, there you go. This is Zephyr. This is another summer squash and another zucchini, which you can also take the male flowers, not all of them, some of them, and you can get fried squash blossoms out of it because they do put on a lot of male flowers to help pollinate the females. And this is about the size that you're wanting to pick them at, about 6 to 8 inches. We do not need baseball bat size zucchini. By that time, when the fruit get that big, the seeds on the inside are mature, which tells the plant, hey, I've completed my life cycle. I have the next generation ready to go, and it's going to stop production if you don't pick them when they're small. So 4 to 6 inch fruit is about the size that you want to. They will be nice and tender, and you won't have to scoop out the seeds. So look, that's generally true for all zucchinis. This is crookneck squash. There's also a straight neck if you're not familiar. This Gentry is a very smooth butter yellow squash, apparently even in stressful conditions. So this might be good for a container because that's a stressful place to grow. Let's see, these are about 5 to 6 inches in length when you harvest. It doesn't claim any disease resistance, so you might have to kind of keep an eye out for that. This one has less spines than other varieties. Again, so you don't scratch your hands up trying to pick. Because those fruit are darn in the middle of that plant. Here's zucchini. This is Black Magic. Black Magic's been around for a long time. This one gets about 4 to 5 feet across. So it's a little bit of a viney plant. Very dark green fruit. Awesome. Does really well with in zucchini bread. And you can see how white the flesh is on that. And if you make chocolate zucchini bread, you can't even tell it's zucchini. So, and if you like a little novelty, maybe you like some squash zucchini, or not squash zucchini, you like a stuffed zucchini. These are little tiny balls of zucchini that are only 2 to 3 inches in diameter. And they look great on shish kebabs or soups. You can also slice them and fry them just like you would a regular squash, summer squash. Here's a light green zucchini. Again, we're looking at, these are only 3 inches long. So you're looking at baby zucchinis. But they'll hold their quality up to 8 inches long. So you're getting kind of close to baseball bat size. Very disease resistant and vigorous. Has a very early maturing date at about 40 to 45 days. So you can definitely fry these in a little pan with some olive oil and some garlic or some, onions. I'm making myself hungry. Here's Spineless Beauty. Again, this one doesn't have any spines on it because that's a problem. Very, very essential. Here's Gold Rush. So we also have yellow zucchini, which confuses everybody. And I'm like, if you look at the top, that's definitely a zucchini top on there. So there's all sorts of things. Again, summer squash. These are, let's see, 4 to 8 inches in length when they're mature and when you need to harvest them. Okay. So when we're growing, there's certain times we need to make sure they have enough water. Now, granted, this year we've had enough water. At bud development, at flowering, and at fruit development. So we're going to make sure that they're going to get an inch of rain a week when the buds start once the buds start coming out and flowering, especially here at fruit development, because those fruits are probably 95% water, especially in the heat of the summer. Again, we talked about fertilization. We're going to bring that soil up to soil test recommendations, and we may not add additional nitrogen. Usually people are like, oh yeah, 6 weeks later, put some nitrogen on. Don't do that with squash and winter and summer squashes, because nitrogen may reduce the yield or lower your quality of vegetables that you get off of that plant. Now we got to talk about the bad stuff. Here we go. There's some insects. Now I hope that you don't get all of these insects, because that's a lot. They do tend to get aphids early in the springtime, and you can tell this is an aphid because it's got 2 tailpipes where the little sugary substance comes out of their rear end. And you can see that be very sticky on a plant, or if your plant kind of turns a little dark, that's the sooty mold that grows on the sugary substance. If you see a lot of ants, you might want to check to see if you have aphids, because ants love to eat this sugary sap that comes out of the back. Cucumber beetles, they're a problem, although they usually feed on seedlings and young plants, but they can also transmit some viruses to your squashes. And when your plants get a virus, you have to pull the whole plant up and start over. It's not like we can just cut that leaf off and be good, because that virus has circulated throughout the entire plant. Our vegetable gardening guide, ID 128, has some really good recommendations if you have cucumber beetles in your plantings on how to control those. Here's cutworms. You'll see these early in the spring, and this one got so tired. Now, granted, this is corn, that it eats through the stem, and it gets so tired after doing all of that work that it just burrows into the soil And you can usually, if you dig around the plant, if you see one that has fallen over, you can scoop that little guy out of the soil and throw him into the grass and let the birds eat him. It's a horrible way to grow, but it's a caterpillar. Sow bugs, you usually find these when there's a lot of dead plant material around. So if they're starting to eat your fruit, you may need to kind of clean up underneath a little bit. It happens when you have a lot of mulch, especially organic mulch, but they're usually not a huge problem. Squash bugs. Oh my, these really can be a problem on your plants. If you start to see these adults, they kind of look like stink bugs, but they're not. They're a little bit longer length. They're in the same family, but they're a little longer than they are wide. They still have that triangular shaped thorax, and this one has like little lines on it, but you can see half of their like wings at the back. So this is an adult, and they basically suck the juice. I was gonna say I don't see his little proboscis out there. That's a leg. But they suck the juice out of your plants. But if you see the adults, be on the lookout for these eggs. They are always this goldeny bronze color. And they're always on the underside of the leaves, but they're usually in this like crook of the veins on the bottom sides of the leaf. So turn your leaves over and then just use your thumbnail. You can either scrape those off, because I see there's some up here in this other corner, or sometimes if there's not very many, I just kind of cut that part of the leaf out. But usually I can scrape that off. I usually bring a towel with me, a paper towel, and just scrape it out on the paper towel. But you do not want those eggs to hatch, because here are what the nymphs look like. They're a little bit smaller than the adults, and you can see these are a little older because they have their little winged buds ready to pop out. That little wing bud out there is a little bigger. Again, they're all sucking the juices out of your plant. So you can see the damage kind of looks like these little light tan spots on the tops of your leaves. So these are squash bugs. Stink bugs, on the other hand, do the exact same thing. And sometimes they're all together the same. So we've got some green stink bugs and some brown stink bugs. And your brown marmorated stink bug, which is our newest foe of the garden, is also in this category. Now we do have some stink bugs that are predatory on other insects, but they're solitary. You won't see them clustered like this. The other big problem we have is squash vine borer. This is a male and a female. This is the male over here on the left, and the female's on the right. She's a little bigger because she gets to lay the eggs. And they lay their eggs on the stems of your squash. And then when that little egg hatches, this little grub gets into the stem and eats out the middle. So what you might see is the tips of your branches wilting during the day when it gets hot and dry. The whole plant may wilt, but it may recover overnight. That'll be okay for a couple of days, but pay attention, because what you can literally do is take a knife and slice through. Let me go back over here. This is what your plant will look like when it's kind of infested with squash vine borers. So what you can do is take a knife, slice your vine vertically or along the vine, not across. And once you find them in there, flip them out and then bury this part of the stem. It'll heal, it'll be okay. But it kind of puts down some new roots, and it will bypass the part of the vine that's kind of damaged. So that's what it looks like when you've got squash vine borers. And it will recover sometimes overnight for a couple of days, but depending on how big they are or how many you have, it may not. You can avoid squash vine borer early in the season by putting on some floating row covers. I've seen actual people, I think my grandfather used to use aluminum foil to keep the adults from laying their eggs on the squash vines. And they're usually there at where the vine goes into the soil. So it's not like you have to cover the whole entire vine, but it's there at the crown level. Once your plants get a little bigger, take your row cover off, or sometimes they call it tobacco cloth. So especially when it flowers, so that you can get some bees underneath there to do your pollination for you. So those are the insects. We'll get to the diseases. Anthracnose is not a very big disease. Sometimes we'll see it in rainy summers. It's this little spot. Usually we can prevent that by doing some sprays, but I wouldn't spray unless you start to see some of these on there. This is bacterial wilt. This is what happens. Looks very similar to squash vine borer, but you don't see like a little frass hole. Frass is like the little sawdust stuff that comes out at the end of the little grub, and they have to exit that through a hole in the stem. So if you don't see a hole, think of bacterial wilt. And if you cut your stem across, can anybody see those little strands? Basically, you touch the knife to the base and squeeze it a little bit. And if you get this is called bacterial streaming. Then you know you've got bacterial wilt. Cucumber beetles transfer this. So control your cucumber beetles, but at this point, you're going to have to take out the plants. We can have this tested at the office, at the lab if you need to, if you've got enough of it in there. We always get some fruit rots. This happens to be a blossom end rot, which is caused by uneven watering, kind of similar to what tomatoes get. But you can also get some botrytis in there. Make sure that you have good sanitation, and then don't throw these back in the garden. Put them in the compost pile or throw them away. Here's mosaic virus. This one kind of gives you some mottled green. Again, when you get viruses in any of your plants, you need to pull up the whole darn thing and throw it away. Throw it away. And then control some of your insect vectors that are giving you the viruses. And powdery mildew is our biggest problem on squashes. And it doesn't need like rain. It just needs high humidity. Hello, welcome to Kentucky, where we always have high humidity. So this one, if you've got a susceptible variety, keep an eye on it, but you're most likely going to have to spray to keep the powdery mildew off of the upper surface of the surfaces of that leaf, so that you get good fruiting production off of your plants. Okay, that's enough of the bad news. Here's the harvest. So when you harvest your zucchini and squashes, these are all summer squashes. You definitely don't want to make sure that they're too big, because those seeds get mature and they're hard to eat. And who wants to scrape out seeds? If they're small, usually 6 to 8 inches, they do pretty well. These are getting, I think because these are all uniform, they're just a bigger variety. These zucchini are too big. This would be great to chop up for breads or put them in soups. I like to put mine in red sauce for my spaghettis and my lasagnas. So that's pretty much what you're going to do. So I tend to grate those up after I scrape out the giant seeds that are in there. Storage. Storage is really easy. What you want to do is cut them into like 1/2-inch slices. You're going to cook them. You're going to blanch them in boiling water for about 3 minutes. And then you're going to stick them into ice water to cool off. And then I let them drain for a little bit to get them pretty dry. And then I put mine into some Ziploc bags, freezer bags, and then freeze them in the freezer. I do like to put them on like a little tray so they're flat. Otherwise, they all fall to the bottom. And then I get some really crazy Tetrising in my freezer space. But that's the way that we can store them. You can leave them in the refrigerator. They'll be good for after washing for about 1.5 to 2 weeks. I will say that National Give Your Neighbor Zucchini Day is August the 14th, because usually we have a lot of zucchini that day. You have been warned. Lock your doors and your windows and your car. You might get zucchini in any form on that day.